For this week's class, you've read a chapter from Stephen Kern's The Culture of Time and Space. This chapter, The Cubist War, provides an analytical framework we can apply to our literary texts. The chapter you read for today is part of a larger argument Kern is making about modernism. In earlier chapters of the book, he argued that modernity, the historical time period between 1880 and 1918 in his calculation, was characterized by increased focus on the nature of time and space itself. We see those interests carried through in the chapter you read for this week's class, the final chapter in his book. Before we get to Kern, let's take a minute to think about Cubism, since all of you may not be art history majors. I'm deriving the information I'm about to convey from John Berger's The Moment of Cubism. You'll find a copy of this on Blackboard. You're not required to read it, but you may find it helpful to think carefully about what Cubism is and how it worked. Cubism is a movement in painting that occupied a brief moment in time, 1907 to 1914, which is why Berger calls it the moment of Cubism. You will note that the end date of Cubism coincides with the beginning of the Great War. Cubism was founded by Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque. We can look at these Cubist paintings and see that they are different from the art that came before. They are still representational. The image you're looking at now is a painting by Duchamp called Nude Descending a Staircase No. 2, and you can certainly make out the body of a woman walking downstairs. But even so, the painting isn't following the rules that had existed before for representational paintings. We can see the figure at multiple points in time, for instance. The figure seems to be broken up into geometric shapes. We are seeing the structure of the image, not just its surface. Berger says that with Cubism, the idea of holding a mirror up to nature became a quaint one. That means that artists had decided that the purpose of art was not to pretend that it merely reflected the world outside. Berger notes that art before Cubism had emphasized its naturalness. It pretended that it didn't have a point of view, and that it wasn't making any kind of comment or intervention. All it was doing was showing what was there. But one of the hallmarks of modernity was the growing understanding that there is always a point of view, and that denying this creates not nature, but lies. So when Berger says that the spirit of Cubism was objective, he means that Cubist artists want to foreground that they have perspective, as a way of making clear the point of view embedded in their work. And when he writes that the power of art lay in its artificiality, he is addressing Cubist belief that art should present itself as art, not as nature. When he says that the metaphorical model of Cubism is the diagram, he's getting at a certain scientific and objective reality they are trying to capture, a reality that has everything to do with modernity. This marks a departure from previous approaches to making art. In Renaissance art, it's clear where to stand to look at the painting. We would not hang the Mona Lisa upside down by accident. We know, looking at the picture, that we should see the woman as the most important thing in the painting. She is in the foreground, and behind her are some trees and landscape that we know is unimportant compared to the woman. Cubists noted that actually the Mona Lisa is paint on canvas. Nothing is in front of anything else. Nothing is more important than anything else. Instead, the painter is making an argument about the relative importance of human beings versus the natural world, even asserting that these things can be separated from one another. By positioning the viewer centrally, the painting also makes an argument about people and how they fit into the world. Cubism wants to erase that privilege. Cubist painters notice that what you see is different if you look at it from different places. Think of yourself in a crowd, at a concert, or at a street corner where an accident is happening or a flash mob has been organized. Your angle focuses your attention on a person in red. Someone looking on from somewhere else focuses on a blue sign. Even someone right next to you sees the event from a different angle than you do, and thus sees something subtly different. Who saw the right version? The Cubists say that all of you together plus all the other places from which the event might have been viewed but wasn't, make up the truth of the event. There is no privileged place to stand. Kern starts his essay with American modernist writer Gertrude Stein, a patron of Picasso, saying that really the composition of this war was not the composition of all previous wars. Right away, we see a shift in the way people are thinking about the Great War as something that has composition, that is artificial and constructed. She goes on to say that the composition was not a composition in which there was one man in the center, surrounded by a lot of other men, but a composition that had neither a beginning nor an end, a composition in which one corner was as important as another corner. In other words, there is no longer a privileged standpoint. In the past, the privileged standpoint would have been that of a general mounted on his white horse, leading the charge with sword upraised. In the Great War, the generals were behind the front, playing with maps and making unreasonable plans for soldiers living and fighting in conditions they couldn't even imagine. Camouflage was one immediate development from Cubism. As you saw in the paintings we looked at just now, most Cubist paintings used monochromatic color palettes, varying shades of sepia, for instance. With the war taking place in the air as well as on the ground, armies on both sides needed a way to conceal their materials and activities. Cubist artists were employed to design and paint camouflage for ships, caissons, and other uses. In one of the Great War centenary commemoratives, a British group has commissioned artists to paint modern renditions of Dazzle ships. This is a picture of one I saw on a research trip to London. There are others, which you can Google to see, and an additional one based in New York is to be unveiled soon. Kern talks about the trenches themselves as having the diagrammatic quality of the Cubist painting. This diagram shows the front line, support, and reserve trenches, a rendition of defense in depth. This trench map from the air shows how perspective on war changed because of the ability to get above the battlefield, either in observation balloons or in aircraft. Photographs of the battlefield helped battle organizers plan, although the state of photography at the time didn't allow for the kind of detailed knowledge of terrain, for instance, that would have been helpful to the soldiers tasked with the actual fighting. Kern also talks about the war's psychological cubism. Cubist paintings look like fragments, layered on top of one another to create a whole that reflects multiple perspectives at once. The war was like that too. Its landscape was fragmentary, divided, shattered. For soldiers in the trenches, the war also brought psychological fragmentation, not just to those suffering from shell shock, but even to those maintaining psychological health, such as it was. And of course, Kern is also interested in how time was fragmented, often on class lines, in the war. Officers were responsible for seeing that things happened on schedule. In the case of attack, for making sure down to the minute that their unit was doing what it was supposed to. These time schemes were often unrealistic. The order of battle might say, attack at 7:30, at 7:32, secure the enemy trenches, at 7:40, relief will arrive. Having to attack through mud, finding the enemy wire uncut, or even meeting resistance from the enemy would blow that plan to smithereens, but the general still insisted on writing those orders. So for officers, who were responsible for keeping track of time on a minute-by-minute basis, wartime was the sum of discrete, sequential units. Things were different for enlisted men, for whom each day was a replay of the day before. For them, the most salient aspect of time was what Kern calls an expansion or thickening of the present, as soldiers found themselves cut off from both the past and the future. In the forum this week, I will ask you to think about how wartime is connected to Cubism. And because it's not really possible to think about time without also thinking about space, I'll also ask how the space of the war evoked Cubist aesthetics. And finally, let's apply Kern's insights to All Quiet on the Western Front. Can you find an example from the book of Cubist time or Cubist space?